The morning she handed me that paper, I already knew something had changed, but I didn't expect it to look like that. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't even a request. It was a list. 12 neatly typed rules, printed on clean white paper, placed carefully on the kitchen counter like it belonged there. Like it had always been waiting for me. "If you're going to stay here," my daughter-in-law said calmly, "these need to be followed." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even react the way most people probably would. Instead, I folded the paper once. Slowly. Placed it back on the counter, and walked to my room without saying a single word. Because what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand, was that I had spent over 3 decades working with numbers, documents, and truth that hides between lines. And I had just read everything I needed to know. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived in this house for over 35 years. Every wall, every creak in the floorboards, every shadow at sunset. I know them all. This house wasn't just a place. It was where I raised my son. Where I stood in the doorway watching him take his first steps. Where I held my husband's hand in his final days. After he passed, the silence in this house felt too loud, too heavy. So when my son Daniel asked if he and his wife could move in just for a little while, I didn't hesitate. They needed help, he said. Just until things stabilized. That was 3 years ago. And somewhere along the way, things shifted. Slowly at first. Furniture moved without asking. My routines quietly replaced. My kitchen became our kitchen. And eventually, not mine at all. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself this was what family did. But over time, something else happened. Something I didn't admit even to myself. I disappeared. Not physically, but in every other way that mattered. I became the woman who stayed out of the way. The one who adjusted. The one who smiled and said, "It's fine," even when it wasn't. Until that list. That list changed everything. I sat on the edge of my bed and read it again. No cooking after 9 p.m. Laundry limited to specific days. No guests without prior notice. Shared spaces to be maintained according to her standards. And then, the line that mattered most. The living room television was for family use. Meaning them. If I wanted to watch something, I should use the smaller one in my bedroom. Family use. I read that line 3 times. Then I stood up, walked to my closet, and opened the fireproof box tucked in the back. Inside was a single document that mattered more than anything else in that house. A deed. I held it carefully. Name. Only mine. Clear. Undeniable. Final. No conditions. No shared ownership. No confusion. This house wasn't ours. It never had been. I placed the document back, closed the box, and slipped the folded list into my pocket. Then I stepped outside onto the back porch and stood there in the quiet. Not the quiet of defeat. The quiet of decision. That night I made a call. I didn't sleep much that night. But it wasn't the kind of restless, anxious sleeplessness that keeps you tossing and turning. It was focused. Or purposeful. I lay there in my bed. The same room I had been pushed into at the back of my own home. And I started writing. Not feelings. Not complaints. But numbers. 3 years of them. I pulled out a yellow legal pad. The kind I had used for most of my career. And began listing everything I had quietly covered during their stay. Electric bills. Water. Insurance. Property taxes. Groceries I had paid for when they came up short. 2 separate occasions where I had made car payments without saying a word because my son had been struggling. Maintenance costs. Lawn service. Repairs. Every detail. Every dollar. By the time morning arrived, I had filled page after page. 6 in total. And what those pages showed wasn't just financial support. It showed a pattern. A long, quiet pattern of giving. Without acknowledgement. Without balance. Without respect. At 8:30 sharp I made my second call. To a man named Richard Hale. A property attorney I had worked with years ago. Precise, efficient, and not someone who wasted time on unnecessary words. He remembered me immediately. I need clarity, I told him. I explained the situation in simple terms. My house, no lease, family occupants, no formal agreement. And now, a list of rules dictating how I was allowed to live in my own property. He was silent for a moment. Then he said something that settled everything. You don't need clarity, he told me. You need action. He explained it step by step. No lease meant no tenant protections in the traditional sense. No financial contribution meant no claim. Their presence was based entirely on permission. And permission could be withdrawn. Legally, cleanly, formally. 30-day notice. Properly delivered. No loopholes. No ambiguity. No room for argument. Will there be resistance? Yes. There always is, he replied calmly. But the law doesn't negotiate with feelings. I agreed to move forward. By Thursday the notice would be ready. And for the next 3 days, I did nothing. At least that's what it looked like. I followed every rule on that list. I stayed quiet. I moved through the house like I always had. Composed. Predictable. But inside everything had already changed. I carried that folded paper in my pocket the entire time. Not as a burden, but as a reminder. A line had been crossed. And I was no longer going to pretend it hadn't. Thursday morning I left the house early. I drove to a small cafe a few minutes away, ordered coffee and sat by the window. I wasn't there to relax. I was there to wait. Because at that exact moment, something irreversible was about to happen. At 10:12 a.m. my phone started ringing. I didn't answer. I already knew what it was about. Few minutes later it rang again. Then a message came through. Mom, there's someone at the door. Call me. I took a slow sip of my coffee and let the moment settle. At 10:20 another call came. This time from my daughter-in-law. That one I answered. There's a woman here, she said quickly, her voice tight with controlled urgency. She says she has legal documents for the occupants of this house. What is going on? Take the papers, I said calmly. Read them. There was a pause. Then her tone shifted. What did you do? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. I did what I should have done a long time ago, I replied. Everything you need to understand is in that document. She tried to continue. Something about respect, about communication, about how family doesn't handle things like this. I listened. But I didn't engage. Because I had heard that kind of argument before. People trying to negotiate reality when it no longer worked in their favor. Finally she said it. There's a 30-day notice here. Yes, I answered. Silence. Then disbelief. You're not serious. I am. In the background I could hear my son asking questions. His voice uncertain, confused. Then he came on the line. Mom, you can't do this. That sentence lingered. I placed my cup down gently before responding. I'm not doing something to you, I said. I'm doing something for myself. Another pause. Longer this time. Then the question I expected. Where are we supposed to go? I didn't hesitate. That's something you should have been planning for already. I ended the call. Not out of anger. But because there was nothing left to explain. The next few hours unfolded exactly as expected. Calls, messages, accusations. I ignored most of them. My son, however, sent something different. Can we talk tonight? Just us. I replied with one word. Yes. That evening, at exactly 7 p.m., he stepped onto the back porch. Same place he had sat as a child. Chair. But this time he looked different. Older. Heavier. Like someone who had just realized something important. And didn't yet know what to do with it. And for the first time in 3 years, we were finally going to have an honest conversation. He sat down across from me exactly at 7. That hadn't changed about him. Punctual, even when everything else in his life felt uncertain. For a moment neither of us spoke. The evening air was still, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel louder. The creak of the wooden chair, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of a passing car. Daniel folded his hands together like he had rehearsed this. I think we need more time, he began carefully. I didn't interrupt. The job market's been unstable, he continued. And she's still working on her certification. 30 days, it's not enough. He glanced up at me, searching for something. Sympathy, maybe. Flexibility. A sign that I might reconsider. Could we extend it? He asked. Maybe 60 days. We could figure something out. Set conditions, contribute more, make things fair. I let him finish. Completely. Because when someone is trying to negotiate from a place of pressure, the most revealing thing you can do is let them hear themselves. When he stopped talking, the silence returned. Then I asked a single question. How much do you have saved right now? He blinked, caught off guard. That's complicated. Give me a number. He hesitated, then said it. It was lower than I expected. And I had already expected it to be low. I nodded once. And your wife? Yes. How much does she have? He shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening slightly. I'm not sure of her exact balance. You don't know. She manages her own finances, he said, a little too quickly. I studied his face. 31 years of reading people had taught me this much. Truth has a rhythm, and hesitation breaks it. Daniel, I said quietly, there's something I need to show you. I stood, walked inside, and returned with a small stack of papers. Not everything I had prepared. Just enough. I placed them on the table between us. Utility statements, insurance payments, records of transactions. 3 years of quiet support. Documented in black and white. He picked them up slowly. At first, his expression didn't change. Then it did. A flicker of confusion. Then concentration. Then something heavier. She told me you offered to cover these, he said quietly. That you insisted. I didn't respond. He turned another page. The car payments, he started, then stopped. She said she paid you back. She didn't, I said. The words landed softly. But they didn't need volume. He set the papers down. Pressed his hand flat against the table. The world around us kept moving, the breeze, the fading light. But something inside that moment had shifted completely. I didn't know, he said finally. I know, I replied. That was the truth. If he had known, things would have been different. Or at least I wanted to believe they would have been. We sat there as the sky darkened, neither of us rushing to fill the silence. For the first time in years, we weren't avoiding anything. Before he stood to leave, he paused at the doorway. I need time to think, he said. You have 30 days, I answered. He nodded once, and went inside. The days that followed weren't loud. There were no dramatic arguments. No slammed doors or raised voices echoing through the house. Instead, something far more powerful took place. Realization. Low. Steady. Unavoidable. Daniel started asking questions. Not to me, at least not at first. To himself. I could see it in the way he moved through the house. The way he paused before speaking. The way he began noticing things he had overlooked for years. 3 evenings in a row. He came to me with quiet, careful questions. About accounts. About payments. About timelines. Each time I answered only what I knew and nothing more. Because some truths people have to uncover on their own. Meanwhile, my daughter-in-law changed in a different way. She stopped speaking to me almost entirely. Where there had once been polite control, there was now tension. Tight, restrained, constantly simmering beneath the surface. She moved through the house like someone waiting for something to pass. As if this situation were temporary. As if somehow I would change my mind. Twice she tried to involve others. Family members. Friends. People who might influence me. But every time the outcome was the same. Facts don't bend under pressure. And I didn't repeat myself. Then one evening in the 3rd week, Daniel knocked on my door. He didn't wait long before stepping inside. He sat down, not looking at me at first. I checked everything, he said. His voice was calm. The accounts. The transfers. The payments. He exhaled slowly. There's more money than I thought. I said nothing. It's not just savings, he continued. It's a lot. Enough that things shouldn't have been this difficult. There it was. Not confusion anymore. Understanding. He looked up at me then. I feel like I've been living in something I didn't fully see, he admitted. You trusted someone, I said. That's not the same as being blind. He shook his head slightly. I defended her. Every time. Even when things didn't add up. Yes, I said. He looked like he expected me to soften it. To say it wasn't his fault. But I didn't. Because growth doesn't come from comfort. Comes from clarity. I should have seen it, he said quietly. And now you do, I replied. That mattered more than anything else. He sat there for a while longer, absorbing it all. Not angry. Not emotional. But still. That kind of stillness only comes after something breaks cleanly. Before he left, he said one more thing. I think I need to have a conversation with her. He nodded. I think you do. It didn't take long after that. Some conversations don't stretch out over days or weeks. They happen quickly, directly. And once they begin, there's no going back. 2 days later, I heard raised voices for the first time. Not loud enough to be called shouting, but sharp enough to carry. Short sentences. Interrupted replies. The sound of something unraveling. I didn't go toward it. I stayed where I was. Because whatever was happening wasn't mine to manage. An hour later, the house fell completely silent. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. Feels final. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of movement. Drawers opening. A step. Car doors. I looked out the window and saw them. 2 vehicles parked outside. Trunks open. Boxes being carried out. No announcement. No explanation. Just action. By midday she was gone. No goodbye. No confrontation. Not even a glance in my direction. Just absence. Daniel stayed behind. For a few hours at least. He moved through the house slowly, like someone seeing it clearly for the first time. Not as a shared space. Not as a place shaped by compromise. But as what it had always been. Home. Later that afternoon he came to the porch. I signed a lease, he said. A small place. Close to work. He nodded. That's good. He looked around, taking it all in, the porch, the yard, the quiet. I think I needed this, he admitted. Not just the move, all of it. Yes, I said. You did. He gave a small, tired smile. I'll come by, if that's okay. Of course, I replied. He left shortly after. And just like that, the house was mine again. Not legally. Had always been. But emotionally. Completely. That night I walked through every room. Slowly. Deliberately. I opened windows. Let fresh air move through spaces that had felt heavy for far too long. At 9:45 p.m., I stood in the kitchen. And made myself a cup of tea. Not because I needed it. But because I could. The first night alone felt unfamiliar. Not empty. Just different. For 3 years, this house had been filled with movement, voices, tension. Small, constant reminders that it no longer belonged entirely to me, even though it always had. Now there was only stillness. I walked through each room slowly, not rushing, not skipping anything. The living room came first. The couch had been pushed slightly off-center, something I had noticed countless times but never corrected. I moved it back, just a few inches. But it felt significant, like restoring balance. In the dining room, the table was still angled away from the window. That had never made sense to me. The morning light used to fall perfectly across that surface, warming the entire room. I placed my hands on the edge of the table and turned it back. Took less than a minute, but I stood there afterward for much longer. Sometimes reclaiming something doesn't require effort, just permission. The next morning, sunlight filled the room exactly the way it used to. Golden. Familiar. And for the first time in a long time, felt like home again. Daniel called later that day. His voice sounded different. Lighter, in a way that wasn't obvious, but noticeable if you were listening for it. "How are you?" he asked. "Good," I said honestly. "And you?" He paused before answering. "I think I'm starting to understand things better." We didn't talk about what had happened. Not directly. Instead, we talked about small things. His new apartment, the quiet, the way he was adjusting to being alone. Sometimes, healing doesn't come from discussing the wound. Comes from stepping away from it. He started calling more often after that. Short conversations at first. Then longer ones. We talked about his work. His plans. What he actually wanted for his future. Things he hadn't spoken about in years. Because somewhere along the way, he had stopped asking himself those questions. Now he was starting again. And that mattered. A week later, I did something I had been thinking about for a long time. Something I had postponed without really understanding why. I invited a few women from the neighborhood over for coffee. Nothing formal. Just a simple afternoon gathering. They arrived one by one, each carrying their own stories, their own quiet struggles, their own versions of compromise. We sat around the dining table, now back where it belonged, and talked. Not about gossip. Not about complaints. But about something far more important. Ownership. One woman mentioned her son had been encouraging her to add his name to her property documents. Another admitted she didn't fully understand the way her finances were being managed, but had trusted someone else to handle it. A third said she had been meaning to update her will for years, but never quite found the right time. I listened carefully. Then I reached for a notepad. And we went through it together. Not emotionally. Practically. Your name on something matters, I told them. More than conversations. More than assumptions. They nodded. Because deep down they already knew. They just hadn't acted on it. We talked about documentation. About clarity. About the difference between helping someone and quietly giving away control. And most importantly, about the idea that generosity is a choice, not an obligation. That afternoon lasted hours. Longer than I expected. When they left, something had shifted, not just for them but for me too. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking myself. I wasn't adjusting. I was simply present. And that felt new. A few days later, Daniel came by for dinner. He brought a small plant with him. "It reminded me of this place," he said, setting it gently on the porch railing. We sat outside as the evening settled in. The same porch, the same chairs, but a completely different energy. There was no tension, no careful conversations, no unspoken pressure hanging in the air. Just ease. At one point, he looked at me and said something I hadn't expected. "I started talking to someone," he admitted. "A counselor." He nodded. "That's good." He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "She asked me something that stuck with me." "What was that?" I asked. "When did you learn to stay quiet to keep things from getting worse?" The question lingered between us. Because the answer wasn't simple. And it wasn't his alone. "I think," I said slowly, "we all learn that at some point." He gave a small, understanding nod. "I think I got too used to it," he added. "Yes," I said. "You did." We didn't rush past that moment. We let it sit. Because some truths deserve space. Before he left, he asked something simple. "Can I come by for dinner sometimes? Not to stay, just to be here." Smiled. "You don't have to ask." After he left, I stood in the kitchen for a while, thinking about everything that had happened. The years I had stayed quiet. The things I had allowed. The moment I finally chose not to anymore. And what it had cost. 'Cause there is always a cost. Waiting has a cost. Silence has a cost. But so does change. The difference is, one takes something from you slowly. The other gives something back all at once. That list she handed me. It wasn't the problem. It was the moment everything became clear. Because sometimes people don't realize what they're asking for until you stop agreeing to it. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing dramatic at all. No shouting, no fighting, no explaining. Just one decision, followed by action. And the quiet understanding that comes after. That what belongs to you was always yours.